Surprisingly, one of the most important aspects of planning a late fall winter garden is actually deciding on which leafy crops to grow. Because it's amazing, but there are a large number of possibilities out there that you can consider. Today we will talk about 4 crops, and the charts will give you some information on those crops. Before we get started, however, I would really like to talk about some basic considerations that you need to think about when you are planning your garden. First of all, you need to have good seed varieties that are preferable for this type of gardening. I will list those on the charts for you, but you do need to look at the packet for planting instructions. But I do want to point out that it's very critical that you plant your seeds in a timely fashion, and we'll give you the range, the recommended planting time. And if you want a successful garden, you need to plant the seeds at the recommended time. You need to provide adequate circulation between the plants, so you space them accordingly, and this is very, very important, especially in the summer. Covering the crops we will talk a little bit about later, but I would highly recommend it, especially with 3 out of the 4. You will be, at the early stages, you want to make sure that you have adequate amount of misting or water for those young seeds and the plants. You want to avoid insect issues and sun scorching. Later on, when you get the tender plants, you want to, later on in the year when you have a dampening issue and we have our colder weather and rainfall, you want to be able to tenderly care for them by covering them so you can control the heat and the water going into the plants. You also want to avoid bolting. That's an important issue. Now, do not fertilize the overwintered crops late in the fall, and I would recommend not later than the middle part of November. This is because the nitrogen in the fertilizer will create new tissue, which is very subject to freezing as the weather gets colder. Now, you need to mulch these crops to hold in the moisture, but certainly remember to remove the mulch in late winter. The very first vegetable is Swiss chard. The recommended varieties are Perpetual, Fork Hook, or Ford Hook. I've seen it both ways, Giant, and Olympia is there too. Amanda talked about the minimum temperatures. I've listed them here because it's important for some areas, but we are pretty safe. I can't remember a time when we've gone below 10 degrees. The critical planting time for Swiss chard is the month of July. You'll plant them by seeds at that time, and the seeds recommended are bolt and mildew resistance. One of the issues you might want to prepare for are flea beetles, and you can use things like spraying canola oil or planting such crops as radishes or mustard seed nearby, because the flea beetles love them as well. It takes 60 days for Swiss chard to reach its maturity, and the outer leaves you harvest first, and it's a wonderful vegetable. Barb will tell you a little bit more about that later. The next one is my favorite. It's called Mizuna. It's in the mustard family, and Kyoto is the seed variety, but it's also part of the Asian vegetables that are so popular right now that people are asking lots of questions how to raise. The critical timing period for planting period for Mizuna is August 15 through October 10. And you need well-drained, cool soil to give plants a space, as well as we talked about before. A fully developed plant takes 45 to 50 days to develop, and it looks very much like lettuce or maybe arugula, but it tastes very good. I love it. The next vegetable is kale, and surprisingly, The curlier varieties and other varieties for the winter, they're hardier. So that's why we can grow them so well. And I've been amazed at how many, I've seen at least six or seven at some of the, well, Nash's Produce, I'll mention that. So winter varieties suggested are Winter Red, Winter Boar, Improved Dwarf, Siberian, Red Chidori. Critical planting dates, July 20 to August 10. Kale is so hardy that it really needs very little protection, and diseases generally are not a problem. You harvest the outer leaves when they're about 8 to 10 inches long, and it takes 50 to 60 days for this vegetable to mature. Last but not least, we have spinach, and this is one of our tender vegetables. The varieties are Bloomsdale Tyee, cold-resistant Savoy, Giant Winter, and we also have an Olympia. It's best to cover spinach late October through February, and I would really cover spinach. The planting date is October 1 through 15, so it's a small window that you have to remember. You're harvesting other vegetables at that time, so you've got to remember some of these dates. You would plant those seeds in rich, well-drained soil, and it takes about 45 to 50 days to get a nice size leaf of spinach, but you can always harvest those little small ones 3 to 4 inches before that time. Now that's all the time we have right now to talk about the leafy greens, but I really want to encourage you to experiment with these greens as well as other crops. It should be a lot of fun for all of us to experiment with next year. So now I'd like to introduce John, who will talk to you about root vegetables.